Hello everybody, this is Eric Widman from Passage Immigration Law, and in this video I want to explore all of the options that a couple has, an international couple has, to be together in the US. The Fiancé Visa option is best known, but there are two other main ways for a couple to end up together in the United States of America. Each process has its strengths and weaknesses, and some of these options won't work for you as a couple, but some of them will. So we're going to look at the K-1 Fiancé Visa, we're going to look at an immigrant visa for your spouse, and we're going to look at adjustment of status following entry as a visitor. Okay, as we look at each of these three pathways to ending up together in the US, it'll be helpful to use a common hypothetical situation here to flesh out the examples. We're going to say that John is the US citizen and he traveled overseas to Europe and met Jane, who is from London. So John and Jane fall in love, they realize they'd like to live together in the US, and now they're confronted with, how do we do this? The first option they have is the K-1 Fiancé Visa. And each one of these options that we're going to look at has its strengths and weaknesses. The K-1 Fiancé Visa is a little bit shorter than the second option, the immigrant visa for your spouse. In general, the K-1 Fiancé Visa is taking around 9 months. Sometimes it can go faster, sometimes it's slower, depending on a whole bunch of factors, including background checks for the foreign national, including delays for summer vacation for embassy staff for the summer. A bunch of different factors come into play, but you could keep in mind that the K-1 Fiancé Visa is in general faster than getting married to your spouse and then petitioning for your spouse with an immigrant visa. So the K-1 Fiancé Visa allows your foreign national fiancée, Jane, to enter the US for the purpose of getting married, and you get married in 90 days. So it's a little bit faster that you'll be together compared to the immigrant visa, but there's a few other extra steps that you have to go to get your spouse the green card. So Jane, after arriving on the K-1 Fiancé Visa, would still need to apply for a green card and still adjust status, which is also the third of the three options that we were going to address. So K-1 Fiancé Visa, it's a great option for most people, probably the most common option when a couple is just getting to know each other, has moved to the point where you know you want to be together and you want to get married, but you're not quite ready to get married outside of the US. The second main way for John and Jane to be together in the United States is through an immigrant visa for your spouse. And so in this situation, John, the US citizen petitioner, is going to petition for his new wife, Jane, and they must have gotten married somewhere in the world prior to filing this petition. So this option, the main difference obviously from the K-1 Fiancé Visa, is that you get married first before you file the petition. And this option is good when, for a variety of circumstances. One might be they do want to get married where the foreign national spouse is located, where your fiancé is. You want to have a wedding in London so Jane's family can be there. It's important for them as a couple potentially to do it that way. Another reason they might want to get married outside the US is they just want to get married as soon as possible. And maybe John's willing to live with her and can switch his job and live in London for a bit. Even if he can't, they prefer as a couple to get the petition process started as soon as possible. A downside of this procedure, the immigrant visa for your spouse, as opposed to the K-1 Fiancé Visa, is that it typically takes longer than the K-1 Fiancé Visa. On average, it takes about a year from the time you file your petition for your spouse to the time that the interview happens and your spouse, Jane, can immigrate to the US. What's good though is once the interview happens and Jane gets the immigrant visa stamped in her passport, is that she can arrive into the US right away and immediately becomes a green card holder. So she doesn't have to then go and adjust status and apply for a new green card. And so this procedure, the immigrant visa for your spouse, in total is a little less expensive than the K-1 visa, which also requires an adjustment of status after that. So you'd save maybe $500 to $1,000 in filing fees by going straight to the immigrant visa for your spouse. The third most common way an international couple can be together is through a process called adjustment of status following entry as a visitor. This option is appealing in many ways, but keep in mind it won't apply to most people because it is something you can get in trouble for visa fraud. It's not something you can pre-plan. You can only proceed with this option if you genuinely did not plan or intend to get married coming into the US. There's many ways you can get in trouble with this, so it's something that you can't do ahead of time and plan for. In some situations though, it can work out if the foreign national, Jane, did not have immigrant intent when she entered the US. So here's a common scenario. Jane visits John in the US. They've possibly been dating for a couple years, or she's visited a few times. She's returned without issue back home to London, and she never overstayed her visa. She's been following the rules as she should. The relationship is progressing. Things are lovely and beautiful. On one particular visit, Jane arrives in the US, and same as before, she was planning to return. She has a return ticket. She has no intent to stay here, but John proposes. John does his best to persuade her to stay with him in the US. He can't bear to be separated again for another visit. So Jane didn't have the intent to immigrate. Jane was planning to return home, but she accepted John's proposal of marriage. She's persuaded to change her mind and develop immigrant intent after she was here. In some situations, this can work out fine and they can move directly into adjustment of status. John and Jane get married. He files adjustment of status paperwork for her, and they skip over the K-1 stage. They don't need to do an immigrant visa. She's already there. She's already here in the US, and they could move faster than the other two steps. There's a number of things that would disqualify them, including immigrant intent. That's the most important issue. But there are other things to watch out for too. And including, for example, this 90-day rule where the US government will presume that the foreign national had immigrant intent if she takes steps that are contrary to non-immigrant intent within those 90 days. So Jane can get nailed for visa fraud if they got married within 90 days, if they adjust status before 90 days. It's a legal presumption that can be overcome, this presumption of immigrant intent. But the current administration, the Trump administration, can and will, no doubt, hammer many couples on this issue. So as you can tell, it's complex. Adjustment of status will not be a viable option for most couples. In a few narrow situations, it can work. I hope understanding the three main possibilities for being together is helpful. You have three main ways to be together with your special someone, and the K-1 option is probably the most common. The immigrant visa for your spouse is also a solid option, especially if USCIS and the State Department have skepticism about your relationship and they want to see that you have a bona fide, genuine relationship. Some couples just skip over the K-1 or even get married after a denial and move forward with an immigrant visa. So that's another reason the immigrant visa is a good option. And finally, there's adjustment of status following entry as a visitor, with many pitfalls, many reasons it's just not possible, and you should not apply for adjustment of status following entry as a visitor if you don't meet the narrow circumstances I described before. Hope this was helpful. I believe it should be. Look forward to our next video.